Moving into Willow Creek Estates seemed like a dream come true. The suburban neighborhood boasted perfectly manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and that quintessential American charm I'd been searching for. I'd accepted a senior executive position at Pemberton Industries, one of the largest employers in the area, and needed somewhere quiet to settle in before officially starting my new role as Regional Operations Director. The modest 3-bedroom rental on Maple Drive was perfect, temporary housing, while I searched for something permanent. What I didn't know was that my landlord had failed to mention the neighborhood's most prominent feature, Karen Whitmore, president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, a woman who treated her volunteer position like she was running a small dictatorship. I met Karen exactly 47 minutes after the moving truck pulled away. I was still unpacking boxes in my garage when I heard the sharp click of heels on my driveway. She appeared like a storm cloud, clipboard in hand, her blonde hair sprayed into an immovable helmet, wearing a blazer that screamed middle management despite never having managed anything beyond neighborhood grudges. "Hello, I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA President. You must be the new tenant." Her emphasis on the word tenant carried enough disdain to curdle milk. "I need to go over some rules with you right now. Tenants have been known to be less invested in maintaining community standards." Before I could even introduce myself properly, she launched into a 20-minute lecture about trash can placement, acceptable paint colors, and the precise angle at which my car should be parked in my own driveway. I listened politely, nodding along, figuring this was just an overzealous welcome. I'd dealt with difficult personalities throughout my career in corporate restructuring. Surely, I could handle one suburban HOA president. Hey, if you're enjoying this tale of suburban warfare, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, back to the story. The first violation notice appeared on my door 3 days later. Apparently my trash cans were visible from the street for approximately 6 minutes past the 7 a.m. collection deadline. The fine was $25. I paid it without complaint, chalking it up to learning the neighborhood's quirks. The second notice came 2 days after that. My car, a sleek black Mercedes that I'd parked in my own driveway, was allegedly parked at an improper angle, creating an eyesore for neighbors. Another $25 fine. When I politely knocked on Karen's door to discuss these issues, she opened it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The rules apply to everyone equally. Well, they apply especially to renters. Homeowners have equity in this community. You're just passing through. I explained that I'd actually be living here for several months at minimum, potentially longer, and hoped we could establish a more neighborly relationship. Her response was to hand me a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, all 73 pages, with certain sections highlighted in yellow. As I walked back to my house, I heard her call out, "Oh, and your lawn is looking a bit uneven. Might want to address that before I have to write another citation." The harassment escalated systematically. Karen drove past my house multiple times daily, slowing down to scrutinize every detail. She measured the height of my grass with an actual ruler. She took photographs of my garden hose if I left it coiled on the side of the house instead of stored completely out of sight. She noted the exact time my porch light turned on each evening, claiming it was too bright and disturbed neighbors, despite being the standard wattage. Every interaction followed the same pattern. Karen would cite some obscure rule, issue a fine, and make pointed comments about renters dragging down property values. My neighbors offered sympathetic looks, but no one dared challenge her. I learned that Karen had been HOA president for 8 years, running unopposed because she'd systematically driven away anyone who questioned her authority. She maintained a thick binder of violations, photographs, and documentation that she wielded like a weapon at monthly meetings. I tried the reasonable approach. I requested a formal hearing to contest the fines. Karen scheduled it for 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, knowing most working people couldn't attend, then claimed my absence was an admission of guilt. I attempted to join the HOA board to change policies from within. Karen informed me that renters were ineligible for board positions, a rule she'd apparently added to the bylaws 3 years ago specifically to exclude temporary residents. My job at Pemberton Industries was set to begin in 2 weeks, and I was looking forward to diving into the challenges of restructuring their regional operations. The company had brought me in specifically to streamline management, improve efficiency, and address some long-standing personnel issues. I'd spent my career turning around underperforming departments, and Pemberton's regional office desperately needed someone who could make tough calls. But first, I had to survive Karen's reign of terror. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I was drinking coffee on my front porch, reviewing some preliminary reports from Pemberton, when Karen's white SUV pulled into my driveway, blocking my car. She emerged holding her phone, photographing my house from multiple angles. "Can I help you, Karen?" I called out, keeping my tone neutral. "Your window shutters are the wrong shade of gray. The approved color is colonial slate. Yours appear to be pewter gray. That's a violation. Also, your mailbox post has a small scratch on it. That's improper maintenance of street-facing structures. And is that a wreath on your door? Decorations are only permitted during designated holiday periods, which ended last week. The wreath was a simple arrangement of eucalyptus, hardly offensive. The shutters had been that color when I moved in. The mailbox scratch was barely visible, caused by the Postal Service's own truck." I walked down to meet her, maintaining my composure. "Karen, I'm renting this property as is. Any issues with existing paint colors or minor wear and tear should be addressed with the property owner, not me. As for the wreath, it's not a holiday decoration. It's just a decorative item." Her face flushed red. "Don't tell me how to interpret HOA regulations. I've been doing this for 8 years. Renters like you think you can just ignore community standards. You don't own anything here. You're just taking up space in what should be a homeowner's residence. People like you are what's wrong with this neighborhood." "People like me?" I felt my jaw tighten. I'd remained calm through weeks of harassment, but her tone suggested this was about more than HOA rules. This was personal, a power trip fueled by whatever insecurities drove her to micromanage other people's lives. "I've tried to be reasonable," I said quietly. "I've paid every fine, followed every rule, and attempted to resolve this cordially. What exactly is your problem with me?" Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "My problem is that renters are transient. They don't care about property values. They don't invest in the community. And they certainly don't deserve the same respect as those of us who actually own our homes. You're here temporarily, and frankly, the sooner you leave, the better. So either follow every single rule to the letter, or I'll make your life so miserable you'll break your lease." She turned on her heel and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway with a stack of new violation notices she'd stuffed in my mailbox. 23 separate citations, totaling over $400 in fines. For issues ranging from my doormat being a quarter-inch too large to my car's tire pressure appearing low, creating an aesthetic concern. That evening, I sat in my home office, looking at those violation notices spread across my desk. Next to them sat the welcome packet from Pemberton Industries, including my official title and the organizational chart I'd be inheriting. I'd been so focused on settling into my new home that I hadn't paid much attention to the specific names on that chart, just the positions and departments I'd be managing. Now, I picked it up and studied it carefully. Regional Operations Director, overseeing 4 departments and 37 employees. My eyes scanned down the list of direct reports. Department heads, project managers, administrative staff. And there, in the Human Resources Department, listed as Senior HR Coordinator, was a name that made me pause. Karen Whitmore, employee number 3472, hired 6 years ago, currently earning $68,000 annually. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Karen had no idea who I was beyond the new tenant she'd been tormenting. She didn't know I was about to become her boss. More specifically, she didn't know that part of my mandate at Pemberton was to evaluate all personnel for performance issues, redundancies, and alignment with company values. The previous regional operations director had been notoriously hands-off, letting department heads run their areas with minimal oversight. That was about to change. Monday morning arrived, and I spent my final week before starting at Pemberton doing research. Not just on the company, but specifically on Karen's employment record. As the incoming regional operations director, I had access to preliminary personnel files. What I found was fascinating. Karen had been with Pemberton for 6 years, but her performance reviews told a story of someone who excelled at following procedures, but struggled with interpersonal relationships. Multiple notes about conflicts with coworkers. Comments about her need to control projects beyond her authority. A written warning from 3 years ago about creating a hostile work environment for a junior colleague. Most interesting was a note from the previous director indicating that Karen had been lobbying for a promotion to HR manager for the past 2 years. She'd been passed over twice, with feedback suggesting she needed to demonstrate better collaborative skills and emotional intelligence. The current HR manager was planning to retire in 6 months, and Karen was apparently convinced she'd finally get the position. I made careful notes, keeping everything professional and documented. I wasn't going to let personal grievances influence my professional decisions. But I was certainly going to ensure that Karen understood the concept of accountability, something she'd apparently never experienced in her HOA dictatorship. My first day at Pemberton Industries began with a company-wide meeting. The outgoing regional operations director introduced me to the entire staff, emphasizing that I'd be taking a more active role in all departments. I watched the crowd of employees, spotting Karen in the 3rd row. She was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention, probably composing another violation notice for some unfortunate neighbor. The meeting concluded, and I began scheduling one-on-one introductions with all department heads and senior coordinators. Karen's appointment was set for Thursday afternoon. I wanted to give her a few days to hear through the office grapevine about the new director's management style, thorough, detail-oriented, and very hands-on. Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek Estates, the violation notices continued. On Tuesday evening, Karen left a citation for my recycling bin being 2 inches over the property line. On Wednesday morning, another notice about my car being parked facing the wrong direction in my driveway overnight. Each fine was $25 to $50, and each came with Karen's handwritten notes about tenant responsibilities. Thursday afternoon arrived. I was in my new office, a corner space with windows overlooking the Pemberton parking lot, when my assistant informed me that Karen Whitmore was here for her 3 p.m. appointment. I told her to send Karen in, then turned my chair to face the window, giving me a moment to compose myself. I heard the door open, heard Karen's heels clicking on the floor, heard her confident voice say, "Hi, I'm Karen Whitmore from HR. Here to meet the new director." I swiveled my chair around slowly, meeting her eyes with a calm, professional smile. "Hello, Karen. Please have a seat." The blood drained from her face. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Her clipboard, ever present in the neighborhood, nearly slipped from her fingers. She remained frozen in the doorway, her brain clearly struggling to process what she was seeing. "Is there a problem?" I asked, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "I have a lot of one-on-ones scheduled today, so let's make sure we use our time efficiently." She stumbled to the chair, sitting down heavily. You're the new Regional Operations Director? That's correct. I started on Monday. I've been reviewing all personnel files this week, getting familiar with the team. Your file was particularly interesting. I opened the folder on my desk, making a show of flipping through pages. 6 years with the company. Senior HR Coordinator. Applying for the HR Manager position. Karen's face cycled through several shades of red and white. I mean, you never said, you're just a renter? I'm a tenant in a rental property, yes. I moved here 3 months ahead of starting this position to get settled in the area. My permanent home is being custom built across town. Should be ready in about 4 months. I let that sink in. But my housing situation doesn't really have any bearing on our professional relationship. Does it? She shook her head too quickly. No. No, of course not. We should probably discuss my role here at Pemberton. I've been with the company for 6 years, and I've really been hoping to move into management. The HR manager position would be perfect for me. I nodded slowly, reviewing her file. Let's talk about that. I see you've applied twice before. The feedback both times mentioned concerns about your interpersonal skills and ability to work collaboratively. Can you tell me what you've done to address those concerns? What followed was 20 minutes of Karen trying desperately to paint herself as a team player, someone who just had high standards and expected excellence from others. She carefully avoided mentioning the HOA, clearly hoping I wouldn't connect her neighborhood behavior to her professional life. I let her talk, taking notes, asking pointed questions about specific incidents in her personnel file. Finally, I closed the folder. Thank you for your time, Karen. I'll be conducting a thorough review of all senior staff over the next month. We'll schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss your career development and performance goals. My assistant will send you a calendar invitation. She left my office looking shaken, but trying to maintain composure. I watched her walk back to the HR department, saw her sit down at her desk and stare at her computer screen without actually doing anything. The realization was clearly setting in. Her tenant was now her boss. That evening, for the first time in weeks, I didn't find a violation notice on my door. The next day, the same. Karen's white SUV no longer made its regular patrol past my house. When I saw her at the community mailbox on Saturday, she practically sprinted back to her house to avoid interaction. The following Monday at work, Karen was a model employee in our morning department meeting. Polite, professional, careful not to overstep or make demands. It was remarkable what a little accountability could do. But I wasn't satisfied. Weeks of harassment, hundreds of dollars in bogus fines, and the sheer cruelty of her treatment toward me, and undoubtedly others demanded more than just her discomfort. I scheduled a meeting with the executive leadership team to discuss my preliminary assessment of regional operations. In my presentation, I highlighted several areas needing attention, including HR department restructuring. I proposed creating a new compliance position that would handle all regulatory and policy matters, effectively splitting duties that currently fell under the HR manager role Karen was pursuing. This reorganization would allow the HR manager to focus primarily on employee relations and development, I explained, while the new compliance director would handle policy enforcement, regulatory matters, and documentation. I believe this structure better serves our growing organization. The leadership team approved the restructuring unanimously. What they didn't know was that this new structure meant the HR manager position Karen wanted would require extensive interpersonal skills, employee advocacy, and emotional intelligence. Exactly the areas where her performance reviews showed she was weakest. Meanwhile, the compliance director role, which might have suited her detail-oriented, rule-focused personality, would require someone with extensive legal and regulatory background. Karen had neither. I posted both positions internally the following week. Karen applied for HR manager, as expected. I also launched a comprehensive performance review process for all senior coordinators, including Karen, examining not just their current role, but their readiness for advancement. As part of this review, I did something Karen had apparently never experienced in her 8 years of HOA tyranny. I collected feedback from her colleagues. Anonymous surveys went to everyone who worked with or near her. The responses were illuminating. Multiple people described her as controlling, unwilling to collaborate, and prone to power trips over minor procedural matters. One colleague wrote, "Karen treats company policies like personal weapons. She seems to enjoy finding violations rather than helping people comply." Another noted, "She's technically competent but has no empathy. When employees come to HR with problems, she makes them feel worse, like they're being investigated rather than helped." The feedback painted a clear picture of someone who shouldn't be in a leadership position, especially not in human resources, a department that required compassion and people skills. Back in Willow Creek Estates, Karen's behavior toward me had transformed completely. She now smiled nervously when we crossed paths, gave me a wide berth, and hadn't issued a single violation notice in 3 weeks. But her treatment of other residents remained unchanged. I watched her berate an elderly neighbor about his mailbox flag being slightly bent. I saw her threaten a young family with fines because their children's chalk art on their own driveway was visible from the street. Karen's problem wasn't just with me. It was with anyone she perceived as beneath her authority. The HOA presidency had given her unchecked power, and she wielded it without mercy or self-awareness. That needed to change, both professionally and personally. The HR manager interviews took place over 2 weeks. Karen made it to the final round, competing against 2 external candidates with impressive backgrounds in employee relations. During her panel interview, I asked her a hypothetical question. Imagine an employee comes to you upset about what they perceive as unfair treatment from their supervisor. The supervisor is technically following policy, but the employee feels the rules are being applied too harshly or without consideration for their circumstances. How would you handle this? Karen's answer was textbook. I would review the policy in question, ensure it was being applied correctly, and help the employee understand the rationale behind the rules. But what about the employee's feelings? I pressed. What if the policy is being applied in a way that's technically correct but lacks compassion or common sense? She hesitated. Policies exist for a reason. Consistency is important. We can't make exceptions based on feelings. The external candidates both gave answers focused on balance, empathy, finding solutions that honored both policy and people's needs. The contrast was stark. 2 days later, I extended an offer to one of the external candidates, a woman with 15 years of HR experience and glowing references about her ability to transform workplace culture. I delivered the news to Karen personally in a private meeting. "I appreciate your interest in the HR manager position," I began. "However, we've decided to go with a candidate whose experience and approach better align with the direction we're taking the department. Your technical skills are strong, but the feedback from your colleagues indicates some areas where growth is needed, particularly in interpersonal relations and collaborative problem solving." Karen's face turned to stone. "I've been with this company for 6 years. I know every policy, every procedure. Some external candidate who doesn't know our systems is getting my promotion?" "It wasn't your promotion," I corrected gently. "It was an open position with multiple qualified candidates. And yes, cultural fit and leadership style matter as much as technical knowledge. In fact, they matter more in a role like this. This is about the HOA, isn't it?" Her voice rose. "You're punishing me because of neighborhood issues that have nothing to do with my job." I kept my expression neutral. "This decision is based entirely on your professional qualifications and the feedback from your colleagues. Your behavior outside of work isn't something I can factor into employment decisions. That said, the patterns people noted in their feedback, being overly focused on rules enforcement rather than problem solving, lacking flexibility, treating policies as weapons rather than tools. Those are professional concerns relevant to this role. She stood abruptly. This is discrimination. I'll file a complaint. You're welcome to do so, I replied calmly. The complaint would go to HR, which reports to me, but you could also contact our corporate ethics hotline if you prefer. All hiring decisions are documented, including interview notes, candidate comparisons, and the rationale for our choice. I'm confident our process will withstand any scrutiny. Karen left my office, slamming the door behind her. Over the next week, she did indeed file a formal complaint, claiming I had a personal vendetta. The investigation was handled by corporate HR, and I provided all documentation. Interview notes, colleague feedback, performance reviews, and comparison matrices showing how the selected candidate's qualifications exceeded Karen's in the key competency areas we'd identified as priorities. The complaint was dismissed. The investigator noted that the hiring process had been thorough, well documented, and based on legitimate business criteria. They also quietly noted concerns about Karen's own professional behavior based on the colleague feedback, suggesting she might benefit from coaching on workplace relationships. But I wasn't done. The HOA situation still needed addressing. Karen might have backed off from harassing me specifically, but she remained president of Willow Creek Estates, still terrorizing neighbors with impunity. That's when I learned something interesting from my landlord, who'd become friendlier now that I wasn't receiving weekly violation notices. The HOA election was coming up in 6 weeks. Karen ran unopposed every 2 years because no one dared challenge her. Candidates needed to be homeowners in good standing with no outstanding violations. Karen had carefully crafted the rules to make it nearly impossible for anyone she didn't approve of to run against her. But here's where my temporary rental situation became interesting. I'd been house hunting seriously, and I'd found a property I loved. Not just any property. The house directly across the street from Karen's, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that had just hit the market. The location was perfect for my commute to Pemberton. The house itself was exactly what I wanted, and most importantly, it would make me a homeowner in Willow Creek Estates. I made an offer that same day, $20,000 over asking price, all cash, with a 30-day closing. The sellers, a retired couple moving to Florida, accepted immediately. I contacted the HOA to inform them of my pending purchase, requesting all necessary documents as a prospective homeowner. Karen had to process my request. I could imagine her reaction when she saw my name on the homeowner application. But she couldn't deny it. The sale was legitimate. I'd meet all HOA requirements, and as much as she might want to block me, there was no legal basis to do so. The closing happened 3 weeks later. I now owned property directly across from Karen, which meant I was eligible to run for HOA board positions, including president. I filed my candidacy the same day I received my deed, exactly 14 days before the election, the minimum notice required by the bylaws. Karen's campaign, if you could call it that, consisted of reminding everyone she'd been a dedicated president for 8 years. My campaign was different. I went door to door, introducing myself to every neighbor, listening to their complaints and frustrations. The stories were remarkably similar. Excessive fines for minor issues, selective enforcement of rules, a culture of fear rather than community. I promised a different approach. Reasonable enforcement focused on actual issues affecting property values and safety, not petty aesthetic preferences. A board that included diverse voices, not just Karen's cronies. Transparent finances, since no one seemed to know exactly where all the fine money went. And most importantly, treating homeowners with respect, not suspicion. The neighborhood responded enthusiastically. People who'd been silent for years suddenly found their voices. They were tired of Karen's tyranny, tired of walking on eggshells in their own community. I represented hope for change, and more importantly, I had something Karen didn't: professional experience in organizational leadership, a calm demeanor that contrasted with her aggressive enforcement style, and absolutely no fear of her retaliation. The election took place at the community center on a Tuesday evening. Every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates attended, the highest turnout in HOA history. Karen sat at the front table, confident despite the murmurs in the crowd. She'd won every election for 8 years. She assumed this would be no different. The voting was anonymous, paper ballots counted by 3 neutral neighbors. When the results were announced, Karen's face went through a remarkable transformation. She'd received 17 votes. I'd received 62. It wasn't just a loss. It was a landslide rejection of everything she'd represented. I took over as HOA President immediately. My first act was proposing a complete revision of the bylaws, stripping away the most petty and excessive rules Karen had implemented. My second was establishing a violation review board, so no single person could issue fines without oversight. My third was implementing a formal appeals process, giving homeowners actual recourse when they disagreed with HOA decisions. Karen sat through that first meeting in stunned silence, watching 8 years of her carefully constructed power structure dismantled in a single evening. She tried to object, citing procedural concerns, but was voted down by the new board, which consisted of reasonable neighbors who'd been waiting years for this moment. But even that wasn't the end of the story. Remember, I was still her boss at Pemberton Industries. The new HR manager started 2 weeks after the HOA election, and her first major initiative was implementing a cultural transformation in the department. She conducted listening sessions with employees across all departments, gathering feedback about their experiences with HR. The results were sobering. Multiple people reported feeling afraid to bring concerns to Karen, describing her as judgmental and punitive rather than supportive. Several noted that she seemed more interested in catching policy violations than helping employees navigate workplace challenges. The new HR manager brought these findings to me, concerned about the impact on employee trust and morale. I reviewed the feedback alongside Karen's performance evaluations and colleague surveys from the hiring process. A pattern was undeniable. Karen excelled at procedural tasks, documentation, compliance tracking, but she fundamentally lacked the empathy and interpersonal skills necessary for her current role, let alone advancement. I called her into my office on a Friday afternoon. "Karen, I want to discuss your role in the HR department. The new manager has shared some feedback that aligns with concerns we identified during the promotion process. I think we need to have an honest conversation about whether your current position is the right fit." Her face hardened. "You're firing me because of the HOA." "I'm not firing you," I clarified. "I'm suggesting we explore whether there's a better role for your skills. Your attention to detail and policy knowledge are valuable, but multiple people have expressed discomfort coming to you with workplace issues. That's a problem in a human resources coordinator position. So what are you suggesting?" Her tone was defensive, angry. "We have an opening in our compliance department. It's lateral, same pay grade, but focused entirely on regulatory documentation, policy maintenance, and audit preparation. No direct employee interaction required. It would leverage your strengths without putting you in situations that don't play to your skill set." She stared at me, understanding dawning. "You're sidelining me, taking away my authority. I'm offering you a role where you can succeed and contribute value without the interpersonal challenges that seem to cause problems in your current position. You can accept the transfer or continue in your current role, but if you stay, you'll need to demonstrate significant improvement in the areas the new HR manager identifies." including mandatory coaching on empathy, active listening, and collaborative problem solving. Karen's hands clenched into fists. You've been planning this since the beginning. Getting revenge for the HOA notices. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. Karen, everything I've done has been based on legitimate professional criteria and documented performance issues. Your treatment of me in the neighborhood was certainly unpleasant, but it was your colleagues' feedback, your performance reviews, and your demonstrated inability to lead with empathy that led to these decisions. You created this situation by treating people, both at work and in the community, as problems to be managed rather than individuals deserving of respect. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. For perhaps the first time in years, Karen Whitmore had nothing to say. She couldn't cite a rule, couldn't issue a violation, couldn't exert authority she no longer possessed. I'll need your decision about the transfer by Monday, I continued. Take the weekend to think about it. But understand that either way, things are changing. In this department and in Willow Creek Estates, the days of unchecked authority and petty enforcement are over. Karen stood slowly, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. As she reached the door, I added one final comment. Oh, and Karen, I noticed you filed another violation notice against the family on Oak Street yesterday, about their Halloween decorations being up one day past the approved period. As the new HOA president, I'm waiving that fine. And I'm suggesting you take a step back from enforcement activities until you can approach them with more proportionality and kindness. She turned, her face a mask of shock and fury and something else. The dawning realization that her entire world, both professional and personal, had been completely and irrevocably transformed. The tenant she'd tormented, the renter she belittled and harassed with hundreds of dollars in petty fines, was now her boss at work and her HOA president at home. Every avenue of power she'd once controlled was now in my hands. And in that moment, standing in my office doorway, Karen Whitmore understood the full scope of what had happened. The rules she'd weaponized, the authority she'd abused, the people she treated as beneath her, it had all come back around in the most devastating way possible. She'd built her identity on petty power, and in her arrogance, she'd never considered that the quiet tenant who paid every fine without argument might actually be someone with the means, position, and patience to completely dismantle everything she created. If you enjoyed watching Karen get exactly what she deserved, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Karen Eat World. We have tons more stories about entitled people facing epic consequences. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update, because trust me, the karma only gets better from here. Thanks for watching, and remember, treat people with respect, because you never know who they might turn out to be. Retry.